He stood on the sidewalk outside a 2 4-hour gas station on the edge of Miami, recording her with his phone held at exactly the right angle, not threatening, just documenting, just proving that she was making a scene, and he was the reasonable one who'd tried everything. Marcus had always been extraordinary at making sure everyone else looked unstable. His dark sedan was parked directly across the street, visible in the frame behind him, a detail most people wouldn't think twice about. Most people wouldn't understand that this was intentional. This was a man who planned his spontaneity. This was someone who had studied the architecture of a breakup so carefully that he could tell you exactly which words would make a woman feel crazy for leaving him. And in that moment, locked behind a bathroom door on a Tuesday night, Margaret was absolutely certain she was crazy. She was 34 years old. She had a master's degree in childhood education. She had built a career teaching fifth graders about healthy boundaries, about recognizing manipulation, about the quiet voice inside you that says, "This doesn't feel right." And she had ignored every single warning. Her own voice had been screaming for the better part of 2 years. It's one of those details that stops you cold when you hear it. A woman who literally teaches children how to spot the signs of an unhealthy relationship, locked in a bathroom, unable to recognize her own situation. That's the thing about shame, though it rewrites your entire relationship to truth. It doesn't matter how educated you are, or how many times you've seen the pattern in someone else's life. When you're the one living it, you convince yourself that you're the exception, that you're just sensitive, that he's right when he says you don't understand real love because your father spoiled you. Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she could barely unlock her phone. That porch light her mother had asked her father never to turn off, the one that had burned every night since her mother's passing 6 years ago. That light suddenly felt very far away. But she called. When her father picked up, all Margaret said was, "Dad, I left him. I'm locked in the restroom at the Shell station on Coral Ridge Drive. He's outside." What's remarkable about this moment is how much a person can communicate in just a few words when desperation strips away everything else. A father hears his daughter's voice at the edge of tears, and something in him doesn't think, it acts. Richard Valdez had spent 31 years as a federal investigator before he retired, though you wouldn't know it from looking at him now. He was 63, with a bad hip that complained on cold mornings and a memory for faces that hadn't dimmed in the slightest. His wife Sophia had died 6 years earlier, and he'd kept her ritual alive, that porch light, burning every single night because it was one of the last things she'd asked him to do. "Leave it on," she'd said. "You never know who might need to find their way home." Richard had kept that light burning not just for himself, but for Margaret, even when she was out living her own life, especially when she was in a situation where she didn't quite realize she'd gotten lost. He grabbed his keys from the kitchen counter, didn't bother with a jacket, and drove through the humid Miami night with the radio off and his daughter's breathing on the phone as his only compass. Margaret stayed on the line for the entire drive, and there were long stretches where neither of them said anything at all. He could hear Marcus outside the bathroom door, sometimes pounding, sometimes going quiet, sometimes trying to convince her to come out by suggesting they'd laugh about this tomorrow. That part was what made Richard's hands grip the steering wheel a little harder. A man who genuinely believes he's going to convince a woman to laugh about being trapped in a bathroom with him that tells you everything you need to know about how he's rewritten the story inside his own head. "He keeps saying he's sorry," Margaret whispered into the phone. "He keeps telling me I'm being dramatic. Do you believe him?" Richard didn't hesitate. "No." "Then don't open that door," he said. 27 minutes later, he pulled into the gas station parking lot. The night had that particular thickness that Miami gets in late spring. Air so humid it almost feels solid. Margaret came out slowly, and even from across the lot, Richard could see it, that hollowed-out look in her face, the way her whole body had folded inward on itself. Marcus stepped back when Richard appeared, suddenly playing the part of the concerned, reasonable boyfriend. He had that polished smile ready, the one he'd probably practiced in the mirror 100 times, the one that said, "I'm the kind of man who makes mistakes but learns from them." Richard had seen that exact smile before. Not on this man specifically, but on a type of man he'd learned to recognize decades ago. "I appreciate you coming," Marcus said, extending his hand. Richard didn't take it. He walked past him toward his daughter, keeping Marcus in his peripheral vision the entire time. Margaret fell into his arms, and for just a second, All of Richard's protective instincts screamed at him to turn around and make this man understand exactly what he'd triggered. But that was the reflex. That was the anger talking. And Richard had learned a long time ago that anger was precisely what men like Marcus counted on. The next morning, Margaret sat at Richard's kitchen table in one of her mother's old Clemson sweatshirts, the sleeves pulled down over her hands, and she told her father everything. Not all at once. In pieces. In moments where she'd go quiet, stare out the window at the courtyard, and then start speaking again. He didn't interrupt. He'd learned early in his career that the most important information often came in the spaces between sentences, in what people were too embarrassed to say out loud. She told him Marcus had started by making her feel seen, remembered small things she'd mentioned once, brought flowers to her school, sent her photos of things that reminded him of her. Over time, he'd told her that her friends were a bad influence, that her coworkers didn't respect her, that her father had spoiled her, and that's why she didn't understand what real love looked like. He'd asked for her passwords. He'd checked her bank account. He'd asked why she'd bought gas in the part of town where her friend Jennifer lived, as if she was lying about why she'd gone there. He'd told her she was too old to act like a teenager. He'd left bruises that could be explained as her being clumsy. He'd recorded their arguments, always with his narrative already written. I was just trying to help you see reason. Honestly, if I'm being honest with you, what gets me most about this part of the story is how Margaret blamed herself for not seeing it. She's listening to her own patterns, describing the exact anatomy of coercive control, and she keeps saying, I teach kids how to spot this. How did I miss it? That's the part that breaks your heart, because it shows you something so true about manipulation it doesn't announce itself. It comes in the shape of love. It comes in flowers and remembered details and soft words. It comes in the form of someone who has studied you so carefully that they know exactly which buttons to push and exactly when to push them. It starts with one boundary violation, then waits a few weeks. Then another. The abuser moves the line an inch at a time, so slowly that by the time the victim realizes the line has moved, they can't quite remember where it started. Richard wrote everything down. Dates, times, specific phrases. In his notebook, Margaret's abuse became data. Her shame became evidence. By noon, he'd made a call to a deputy he'd known for years, a man named Garrett who'd worked homicide before moving into enforcement, and who had that particular kind of patience that comes from watching people tell themselves the same lies over and over. By afternoon, security cameras had been installed around Richard's house. By evening, his brother Felipe had arrived with coffee and barbecue sandwiches, and Richard's neighbor Iris, a woman in her late 60s who'd spent decades in emergency dispatch and could hear someone falling apart before they'd spoken 2 words, had set up a command center on Richard's kitchen table with her laptop and a notebook filled with angles and blind spots. What Margaret didn't know yet was that her father wasn't just going to confront this man. He was going to build a case so airtight that Marcus would have nowhere left to hide. And the beautiful, terrible thing about that approach is that it requires patience. It requires letting the antagonist believe he's winning. 3 days later, a photograph arrived on Margaret's phone from an unknown number. Her school parking lot, taken from the far side of the street. The caption, "Pretty easy place to find you." Margaret went white. She immediately couldn't go to work. She couldn't go anywhere. The isolation that Marcus had worked 2 years to build was now complete. He'd done it not through his words anymore, but through her fear. And that's when Richard sat his daughter down and said something he'd never told her before. I was a federal investigator for 31 years. Your mother knew. I never brought it home because I didn't want that work following me to the dinner table. Margaret had looked at him like he'd just admitted to a secret life. Your whole childhood, he continued. I spent learning how men like this one operate. I know exactly what he's going to do next, because I've tracked down 100 men just like him. And I'm telling you right now, we're going to document everything. Every message, every image, every threat. And by the time he realizes what's happening, he won't have a single angle left. The mistake most people make when they encounter someone like Marcus is that they think the solution is to out-argue them or out-confront them. They want a moment where the truth is finally spoken and the abuser has to face reality. What Richard understood, what decades of enforcement had taught him, was that men like this don't respond to truth. They respond to evidence. They respond to witnesses. They respond to running out of narratives. The first person Richard found was a woman named Brenda. Her name had appeared in a court filing from 4 years earlier, a protective order petition that had been dismissed, which wasn't the same as being fabricated. Dismissed usually just meant the person filing it had run out of courage to stay in the room. Brenda's old address had been 2 streets away from where Marcus was living at that time. When Richard called, Brenda didn't answer. On the second call, she didn't answer either. But on the third, a text arrived. "Who is this?" Richard replied with the truth, his name, his daughter's situation, and an invitation. "Your name came up in a public court filing. If you're willing to talk, it might help protect my daughter." 30 seconds passed. Then, "Meet tomorrow. Blue Ridge Diner in Coral Gables. 10 in the morning. Bring another woman. I don't sit down with men I don't know alone." The diner was a place that hadn't been updated in decades, the kind of establishment where the waitress called everyone honey and nobody questioned how long you wanted to stay. Brenda walked in 7 minutes late, wearing a green raincoat buttoned to the collar despite the Miami heat. She had the look of someone who'd been scanning rooms for danger for a very long time. When she saw Margaret, something shifted in her face. Recognition. Not pity. Recognition. She sat down without any preamble and asked, "Did he take your phone yet?" Margaret's eyes filled up. "He tried." Brenda nodded the way you do when 3 questions get answered at once. "He's extraordinary at the beginning," Brenda said, stirring sugar into a cup of coffee she never touched. "He makes you feel like you're the one person on earth who was actually built to be understood by him. Then he starts. Your clothes, your friends, the way you walk, the way you talk, your dad." She looked directly at Margaret. "Did he ever tell you that your father had too much influence over you? That your dad was the reason you couldn't see what real love looked like?" Margaret couldn't speak. Brenda turned to Richard. "He always needs someone to cast as the villain. When I tried to leave, he started telling people I was unstable. He'd record our arguments and cut out his own voice, then play them for people and ask if I sounded normal to them." Iris, who had insisted on coming along, muttered something low and angry. Brenda's smile had no warmth in it. "Exactly," she said. "He even sent me a photograph of my dog in my backyard, then one of my mother at church." That's when I realized he wasn't jealous or heartbroken. He was keeping a record of what he could hurt. Margaret reached across the table and took Brenda's hand. This moment, this right here, was the moment Margaret's shame started to crack. Because Brenda was the proof that Margaret wasn't broken, wasn't impossible, wasn't the unlovable woman Marcus had convinced her she was. Brenda was the proof that the pattern was real, that it was recognizable, that it was predictable in its machinery, even if it felt completely random from the inside. That same night, Marcus came past Richard's house. The security camera caught him at 2:17 a.m. His sedan crept past with its lights off, then slowly reversed. He got out, walked up to the porch as if he'd rehearsed every step, and left something beside the front door. The footage was grainy and black and white, but clear enough to see his face, clear enough to see his hands, clear enough to see that this was not a man in spontaneous emotional distress. This was someone executing a plan. When Richard looked at the object Marcus had left, his chest went cold. A necklace. A thin silver chain with a small round pendant, the one he'd given Margaret for her college graduation, the one she'd worn under her graduation gown, the one he'd watched her touch 1,000 times because it was his way of saying, "I see you. I believe in you. You're going to do remarkable things." The clasp was broken. If you have ever had something precious to you violated by someone else's hands, you know the particular anger that creates. It's not the same as the anger of physical threat. It's deeper than that. It's the feeling of your sanctuary being breached, of a person showing you that nowhere is actually safe if they decide it isn't. Richard stood there on his porch in the dark and let himself feel that anger for exactly 1 minute. Then he made it into evidence. He made it into documentation. He made it into proof. The recordings started arriving next. Marcus calling Margaret and making demands. Marcus recording her silence and interpreting it as agreement. Then, a week later, something that almost worked, an audio clip Marcus had edited. In his version, Richard's voice came through harsh, threatening, "I'll handle you my way. You've pushed this far enough. You won't like what happens next." It was Richard's voice. It was Richard's words. But it was missing everything that came after. The part where Richard explained that his handling meant documentation, cameras, and legal processes. Garrett had called Richard as soon as he heard the edited clip, and Richard had smiled. Because Marcus had just handed them the key to everything. The night Marcus came to the house, Richard was ready. He stood on the porch with his brother Felipe in a lawn chair beside him, with Iris in her own chair across the street adjusting camera angles with the focus of a woman who'd spent decades taking reports and understood that details were survival. Deputy Garrett's car was parked a half block away, positioned perfectly so he could move fast, but not so close that anyone could claim intimidation. When Marcus pulled up in his dark sedan, he stepped out, dressed exactly like the polished professional he'd always claimed to be: clean jeans, button-down shirt, and that smile. He was already filming. "Good evening," he called out, walking toward the porch as if he'd been invited. Nobody answered. He climbed one step. "Natalie," he said, using Margaret's middle name, the way people do when they want to sound intimate and dangerous simultaneously. "I just came to talk." Wendell, Richard's brother, leaned over. "You know what's funny?" he said quietly. "I had knee replacement surgery that frightened me more than you do." Even Garrett, standing beside his cruiser down the block, dropped his head to hide a smile. Marcus ignored it. He focused on Richard instead. "Mr. Puig, I need to talk to you." Richard kept his hands folded. He didn't move. Marcus took another step up onto the porch. "You've been gathering facts about me, spreading things, trying to ruin my name." Richard's voice was absolutely level. "No. I've been documenting your behavior." Something flickered across Marcus's face, a moment where the facade cracked just slightly. Then he reassembled it. "You're the one making her afraid," he said. He turned to Margaret. "You know what your father really is? He's just an old man who can't stand that you're with someone else." Margaret rose from her chair. Her knees were unsteady, but her voice held perfectly. "You need to leave." Marcus didn't even glance at her. He turned back to Richard and took another step up. "I just want 5 minutes. Let me explain." Richard stayed in his seat. "No. I deserve a chance." "No." Marcus took the final step onto the porch. He was physically elevated now, trying to position himself above everyone else, trying to manufacture dominance. It was so textbook that Iris actually had to look away to keep from smiling. Richard rose slowly. His knee creaked the entire way up. Every reflex he had wanted to throw this man off his porch, to make him understand that he'd chosen the wrong person to underestimate. But Richard had learned long ago that that was exactly what Marcus expected. That was the narrative Marcus had already written. "Your father is unstable. Your father is violent. You see? This is why you can't trust him." So instead, Richard pointed toward the sidewalk. "Marcus, you can walk away from here tonight, a free man. Or you can stay right here and let everyone watching, including your own phone recording every second, watch you dismantle your own life." For the first time all evening, something behind Marcus's eyes gave way. Just a flicker. Richard caught it. Marcus pulled it back fast. "You think you've got me cornered?" He laughed. "I don't think anything," Richard replied calmly. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a small flash drive. Marcus's expression shifted barely, but it moved. "That's my copy," Richard said. "I record every phone call my porch cameras pick up, conversations included." Marcus forced a laugh. How convenient. Anyone can doctor a file. Iris, who had been waiting for exactly this moment, unplugged her laptop from where it had been running off the porch outlet and turned the screen toward everyone. "So can you," she said flatly. "Let's just play it." The conversation started. Marcus's voice, Richard's voice, the background sounds matching perfectly at first. Then things diverged. The edited version cut off where Marcus had wanted it to, but this version kept going. "Now come on," Marcus's voice said on the tape. "Say something angry. Tell me what you're really thinking." Richard's response came through steady. "I'm thinking you should leave my property." Marcus on the tape. No, that's boring. Say you'll handle me. Come on, tell me what happens next." And Richard, patient as stone. "I'll handle you my way. Because this time, Everyone can see exactly what that means. It means cameras. It means reports. It means every legal avenue I have. And then, the part Marcus had cut, it means your daughter gets to live without checking over her shoulder. It means she gets to stop being afraid. Silence spread across the porch like something physical. Margaret was staring at Richard with tears streaming down her face, but not from fear. From finally hearing someone say, "I believe you, and I have evidence." Marcus's confidence was collapsing in real time, and the worst part for him was that he couldn't rewrite it fast enough. Garrett stepped forward. "I think we've heard enough." Then he looked directly at Marcus, Colby Weston. But before Garrett could finish, another car pulled up, a white SUV. Connie Tillman, the principal at Margaret's school, stepped out carrying a folder. She walked up the driveway with the focused look of someone who'd waited a very long time for this moment. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said calmly. "I wanted to make sure we had all the security footage from our parking lot." Marcus started to speak. Connie didn't let him. "Mr. Weston came to our school on 3 separate occasions after Margaret had asked him to stop. He parked across the lot and waited. For over an hour last Tuesday." She handed Garrett the photographs. Margaret gasped. "I never knew." "You weren't supposed to," Connie said, her voice gentle. "A staff member flagged it because she kept seeing the same vehicle. We were documenting it." Brenda was next. She stepped out of her car and walked up to stand beside Margaret, not in front of her, beside her. Her presence alone was a statement. This pattern is real, and I can prove it. Marcus's composure cracked visibly. He looked around the porch and realized that every direction he turned, someone else was standing there with evidence he couldn't rewrite. Garrett extended his hand. Marcus, dazed, handed him the phone. Garrett pressed play, and this time the world watching Marcus's live stream saw exactly what had happened. They watched as his entire strategy imploded on video. His own phone, his own documentation, had captured his own destruction. Garrett placed the phone down and looked directly at Marcus. "You're under arrest for criminal trespass, harassment, intimidation, and evidence tampering. Additional charges will follow." Marcus's face went pale. "This isn't fair. You set me up." Richard's voice came quiet and certain. "Cameras don't frame anybody. They just record what's real." As Garrett walked Marcus to the cruiser, Marcus twisted back one last time, and Richard watched that mask try to reassemble itself one final time. But there was no one left to convince. The smile had nowhere left to land. The door swung shut. The taillight vanished into the Miami night. What I want you to understand is that this story isn't about a father winning against an abuser. That's the surface narrative. The real story is about a daughter learning that she doesn't have to convince anyone she's telling the truth. The evidence will do it for her. It's about understanding that sometimes love means not jumping in with fists, but instead giving someone the space and documentation to prove themselves right or wrong. It's about recognizing that patience is sometimes more powerful than anger, and evidence is always louder than charm. The courtroom hearing came 3 weeks later. Margaret sat in the gallery in a charcoal gray blazer, nervous but not scared. There's a profound difference between those two things. Richard sat beside her, his hand reassuring but not intrusive. The judge delivered the ruling in a level voice. The pattern of harassment was credible and well supported. The altered audio was conclusive. The independent testimony reinforced the entire picture. The protective order would stand and be strengthened. Marcus was barred from any contact whatsoever. Criminal proceedings would continue. Here's what Margaret told me afterward, and what I need you to hear. The part that mattered most wasn't the arrest. It wasn't the court. It was realizing that people believed me before I had to provide proof. That's what broke the spell. That's the lesson underneath everything. If someone in your life tells you something feels wrong, believe them. Not after the evidence arrives. Before. Believe them while they're still shaking. Believe them when they're still covered in shame. Believe them when they're still wondering if maybe they're the problem. The second lesson is about documentation. Richard wrote down times, dates, exact messages. He saved recordings. He gathered corroborating witnesses who had nothing to gain and everything to risk by coming forward. He didn't rely on his authority or his experience to convince anyone. He built a structure so airtight that Marcus ran out of angles. In your own life, that means save the messages, timestamp the incidents, tell trusted people what's happening. Not so you can build a case necessarily, but so that if you ever need the evidence, you have it. So that your own memory of events is supported by something external. So that someone else can look at the documentation and tell you, you're not crazy. This is real. If you have ever felt isolated by someone who made you doubt your own perception, this story was for you. If you've ever had to choose between believing someone you love and believing the narrative a manipulator has built, this story acknowledges how impossible that choice is. And if you've ever wondered whether documentation or action is the right response to injustice, the answer is documentation first, always. Let the facts do the work your anger wants to do. I want to ask you something as we're finishing. Drop a 1, 2, or 3 in the comments. 1, if you think Richard handled this perfectly. 2, if you think he should have confronted Marcus directly when he first arrived. 3, if you think there's something I'm missing about this story. I read every single comment, and your perspective matters. Also, where are you watching this right now? And what time is it there? I find that people watching from different parts of the world and different times of day have completely different reactions to stories like this one. I'm genuinely curious. If you've experienced something similar, not necessarily an abusive relationship, but someone in your life who tried to rewrite reality and made you question your own sanity, I want to know. Not to share your pain, but because stories like that need to be heard, and you need to know you're not alone in it. If this story stayed with you, it means something to you, whether it's anger, recognition, validation, or something else entirely. Will you share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not crazy? A friend, a sister, a colleague who's been told too many times that no one will believe them? That one share might change everything for that person. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this one, stories about patience, documentation, community, and the quiet power of truth catching up with lies. I don't want you to miss what's coming next. Thank you for staying with me through this one. Take care of each other. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Miami to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.